Okay, the describe command displays the structure of a specified table. It does not show you the data or the contents of the table. It tells you how the table is built. By the way, this is one of the few Oracle commands that can be abbreviated. You can type out the word describe completely, or you can type DESC and then the name of the table, and you see the table description. Now, depending on which environment you're using, SQL Plus, Oracle 10G Express GUI environment, or the Apex website's GUI environment, you might see a different layout. But in SQL Plus, you're going to see 3 columns of description for your table. The column names, these are the column names, and if we back up a slide, in the create table example, we created an account manager table with these column names. This second column of data describing the table is the null column. In other words, this tells you whether or not a field can contain null values. Okay? Now, right now, every single one of these fields can contain null values. If it could not contain null values, you'd see the words not null. I'm not going to write out the entire word here. Okay? But you would see not null written here. And then finally, this third column describing the table is the data type. Shows you the type of data for each column and the maximum length of characters or numbers in that particular column. Notice the date doesn't have a length because all date data is stored in the same format. Doesn't matter how it's entered. All date data is stored in the same format. We'll talk about that a little bit more in detail in a later chapter. Okay. We see a couple of different examples of types of numbers. This particular example, the number uses the parentheses 7, 2. Precision of 7 means there's 7 digits total. 2 is the scale. It means that there's 2 of those 7 digits are to the right of the decimal place, or right to the right of the decimal point. Okay. This number data type is for a floating point integer. Okay. Since there's no length, it means it could be any number of characters, and the decimal place can be anywhere. The decimal place can be different for each record. Alright, you can create a table using a subquery. Well, a subquery is a select statement within a statement. In this case, it's a select statement within a create table statement. And what you do is you have the create table clause, and then you have an as clause. Now, the book might not refer to it as an as clause. They just say using the as keyword. But following the as keyword, you have a query or a select statement. Okay? And in that select statement, you're going to select specific fields or columns from an existing table. Right? The new table will, by default, and excuse me, I'm going to back up one little click. The new table will, by default, have the same column names as the existing table, and it will also contain the data that's in the existing table. However, you have the option to rename the columns in the new table by assigning new column names. You would do that in the create table clause. And I'll show you an example. Okay. Here's the syntax diagram. Again, the keywords are in uppercase. Create table, you provide the new table name, and then notice the brackets. In parentheses, you put column names. Notice that you don't have to do data types. The column names, and then the as keyword or the as clause, again, in parentheses, a subquery. Remember, a query is a select statement. So you would say select customer ID, L name, last name, and these would be separated by commas, from customers. It would, by default, grab the customer ID column, name, and data, the L name column and data, the F name column and data, and I hope I'm using the right column names, but those would be the default names of the columns for your new table. However, you could provide different names. Okay? If you want to change one column name, you have to list all. If you have any column names up here in your create table clause, you have to provide a column name for every column that is selected in your subquery. Here's an example. Now this example does not provide new column names for the new table. So they're going to create a table called cust_mkt. That table is going to contain these 6 column names, exactly the way you see them here. And the new table will also contain the data that is in these 6 columns, which are currently in the customers table. Okay. You can modify existing tables using the alter table command. And you can alter it by adding a new column, modifying an existing column by changing the column definition, or you can drop a column from an existing table, get rid of it. And actually, you can also set a column as unused. It doesn't drop it, it just kind of marks it as we're not going to use it right now, and then if it is marked unused, you don't see it in the select statements or the describe command, but it's still there. Here's the syntax diagram. And notice the vertical bars, so these are mutually exclusive. In other words, in an alter table statement, if you're going to add a column, you can only add a column. You can't add more than one column. If you want to add 2 columns, you have to write 2 alter table statements. If you want to add a column and modify a different column, again, you would need 2 different statements. So, again, the mutual exclusivity of the add, modify, and drop. Example of the add command. I'm not going to go into detail, but this is how you would add. And actually, I do need to explain something. When you add a column, you have to provide a column name and a column definition. Again, I'm going to back up to the syntax diagram again. I apologize for not being more rehearsed here.